Germany is announcing it will deliver anti-aircraft tanks to Ukraine. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is at this hour holding a meeting with defense officials from about 40 nations to expand military support for Ukraine. Listen.
My Ukrainian friends, we know the burden that you all carry. And we know, and you should know, that all of us have your back. And that's why we're here today, to strengthen the arsenal of Ukrainian democracy.
Joining us now, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Ivo Daalder. He's also president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And really good to have you in here with the new headlines. We're going to go straight to those headlines with Lavrov saying this is in fact a proxy war with NATO. And he, again, it won't surprise you, brought up the nuclear issue and saying, look, we are very close to this escalating and perhaps becoming a nuclear conflict. How do you see his comments?
Well, you know, none of this would be even happening unless Russia invaded Ukraine. And that is the fundamental problem that I think we're seeing happening over as a result. So if there is a war or a proxy war, it's because Russia invaded Ukraine. If there is escalation, it is because Russia decides to escalate. Had Russia not invaded, we wouldn't be where we are. And the result is that if we listen to Mr. Lavrov or Mr. Putin, they would be able to occupy all of Ukraine and have designs on further expansion. That's why it's important for us to stand up with the Ukrainians, to provide them with the means to defend themselves in Ukraine before this gets any further out of hand because of the designs that Russia has, not only on Ukraine, but frankly on the rest of Europe as well.
Do you think the resolve of the West is pivoting here? Do you think we're seeing a different stage of this in terms of how far they are willing to go to arm and help Ukraine?
Yeah, I think things are changing. We already saw in terms of the escalating on sanctions over the last few weeks, a coming together of Europe and the United States and our allies in the West, really in disgust of what the Russians have been doing. The kind of pictures we saw coming out of Bucha, the unrelenting bombing of civilian targets, particularly in Mariupol, but everywhere else, really has stiffened the spine of the West. And then, of course, the Ukrainians have demonstrated a remarkable capability of defending themselves and even defeating Russian advances around Kyiv and other places. And so there's now this belief that if we can provide the Ukrainians with sufficient means, with the kind of heavy weapons that are being talked about today in Germany at the meeting that you just mentioned that Secretary Austin has convened, that in fact, not only can we help Ukraine stop the Russian advance, but actually push them back. And there is this sense now that there is an opportunity not just to reestablish sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, but weakening Russia for the long term, so it will never again be in a position to do what it did on February 24 and invade a country that posed absolutely no threat to Russia.
I know that's the goal, but I'm wondering how realistic that is. I mean, as you've been speaking, we've been showing pictures of the devastation in Ukraine. Ukraine, as you know, bearing a huge cost for this. And yet you write that, look, NATO should go further, not only including countries perhaps like Finland and Sweden, but also allowing Ukraine in. Some argue that's far too provocative and that we need a more imaginative security architecture that perhaps won't provoke Russia as much. I take your point that this is on Russia, and yet we seem to have very little leverage to change things on the ground right now in Ukraine.
Well, the leverage we have is sending the weapons that we are sending, and that is making a tremendous difference on the situation on the ground. Russia clearly has not succeeded in its initial goal, which was to overthrow the Ukrainian government and basically control what was happening in Ukraine. It has now scaled back its immediate ambitions to the east, where, in fact, it has been fighting the Ukrainians for the past eight years. And I think the lesson we now learned is that countries that are part of NATO are likely to be far more secure than countries are not. It's a lesson that the people in Finland and Sweden have come to a conclusion. Sweden has been a neutral and independent country for over 200 years, and now we see that they think that the Russian threat is such that they can only be secure to be part of NATO. If the Russian threat were to disappear, if Vladimir Putin were no longer in power, if his regime were no longer controlling what is happening in Russia, then of course you want a new security system, one that embraces Russia and the Russian people and makes sure that we are all secure by living peacefully together. But we can't get there if we allow Vladimir Putin to succeed in Ukraine, because if he succeeds there, his ambitions will go far beyond.
You know, many have commented that this is just going to embolden other rogue nations around the world, especially down that very dangerous nuclear path. Is this not the message to them, though? I mean, Vladimir Putin is at this hour receiving the Secretary General and likely saying, we refuse to budge. Basically, they are holding all the cards right now.
Well, they're holding a lot of cards, but they're also lost a lot of them. Remember that the initial phase of this operation was going to last for just a few days, that the government in Ukraine would have fallen, that a new puppet regime would have been installed, that Russia would have occupied and put under its control not just the capital, but also all the major cities in Ukraine, including Odessa, that the West was supposed to shiver and stand in division rather than being united, and that Russia really would get away with it. Well, where is he now? He's lost the initial stages of the battle. He is no longer going to be able to control Ukraine. The government is stronger and more united and in control of Kyiv and launching counteroffensives around the country. He has found that NATO has become stronger and more capable, putting forces closer to Moscow, and indeed Finland and Sweden deciding to join NATO. And he's facing a much more united Europe and a much more united alliance that is now also imposing very severe economic sanctions that are going to hurt the Russian economy for decades unless something drastic changes. So if anybody looks at this and says Vladimir Putin is getting away with a lot, I think what they're seeing is a very strong reaction and a miscalculation on Vladimir Putin's part. That they will take to heart, and they won't necessarily do the provocative things elsewhere because of fear of what the United States, its allies around the world can do in response.
Well, we'll see if it does work as a deterrent. It is not so far in Ukraine, unfortunately. Ambassador, thank you for weighing in on this. Appreciate it.